Hey everyone, I'm Rather Incoherent, and today I want to talk about Mandy Thompson. I just played her as our primary fighter through Forgotten Age with a pair of Seekers, the other one being a quote-unquote primary cluever Amanda Sharp, but she frequently had to help with fighting because there's only so much fuel in the deck. Even with 2 Ancient Stones, reshuffling them with the Scroll of Secrets, digging through my deck constantly with Occult Lexicon to replay the Ancient Stones, that's a lot of testless damage, but for Forgotten Age, that's not enough. Amanda Sharp had to help too. Now, I'm not going to talk about this deck. This is a 70 experience deck at the end of Forgotten Age, and I didn't even spend all my experience, just stopped caring by the end. So let's go take a look at an earlier version of the deck when I was at around 35 experience. This is a point where I had realized that I really needed the second Ancient Stones. I'm starting to upgrade other things like Cryptic Research. I haven't gotten into deductions yet. And this is already a Mandy that's not the usual Mandy you would see. The usual Mandy isn't going to be running 2 copies of Ancient Stones and Archive of Conduits immediately. That 12 experience does not look like deduction level 2 to me, and therefore, in a normal game, it is never what I would consider doing. So while I'm going to talk about this deck a little bit as a primary fighter, and what Seekers can do as primary fighters in general, I want to switch over to a 40 experience deck I created for another video that's going to be coming up soon, or it may even already be out, I don't know. But I'm going to talk about that deck, and I talk about Mandy generally. So let's talk about Seekers as fighters. The big issue is that Occult Lexicon costs money. This deck needs more resources. Eventually I add Cryptic Writings to the deck, and it starts finally feeling good there. But without Cryptic Writings, Occult Lexicon is going to drain all your resources, and you really need to be cycling these Ancient Stones just spitting out damage free. In terms of fighting, the deck is one or the other. The best fighter in the game, everyone dies without you rolling a dice, or I literally physically can never kill this, please help. Those are the only 2 modes of operation that dedicated fighter Seeker has, unless you're playing like Joe Diamond. That said, the vast majority of the time, even in Forgotten Age, the situation was, oh yeah, I can kill everyone. We're not worried because we can't kill the Harbinger, we're worried because we're not supposed to kill it. That was always the problem we had. Eventually there were some scenarios, usually the ones that have the Vengeful Serpents, or just a lot of boss enemies, where I started really running out of steam and needing more than this. And early on, I really struggled frequently because all we had was Occult Lexicon, and I didn't really have the economy to support it. This is at its most visible in the Doom Vestili, I think. But this deck did really reasonably well as a fighter, despite the fact its off turns were like practice makes perfect, deduction, investigate a second time with deduction, get 4 clues. The fact that this functions as a fighter is one of the things I wanted to demonstrate by intentionally picking weird characters for Seekers only and not taking a Joe Diamond. I wanted to show off just how strong Seeker fighting is. It's weird, it's got its limits, but the fact it's able to get through the Forgotten Age without a real fighter is wild. Now let's go to the real world and look at a reasonable 40 experience Mandy deck. You want to help your team fight? Cool, run a single Occult Lexicon, don't bother upgrading it, that's more than enough. If your team needs more than 6 testless damage on the boss, they need to fix their problems, it's not your job. And this deck is very strong on the clue finding front. You can see we've still got the Archive of Conduits. It's just a card I really like. It means that your team basically can't die. And if you're not dying to the Mythos phase, usually that means you're winning. There are very few circumstances where you're losing and it's to a reason other than just taking damage. And Archive of Conduits is the best way in the game of fixing damage. Aside from that arguably weird choice with Archive of Conduits, it's the standard Mandy thing. You get Mr. Rooks, you use them to quickly assemble a segment of Onyx, give it more charges than Raptured and Practice Makes Perfect. When you're not doing that, you're trying to practice Makes Perfect deduction to get clues faster. Your economy is more than good enough if you don't need to be fueling an Occult Lexicon every turn, which this deck never should. And aside from that, it's just broken Seeker cards. Also Promise of Power, because I will mention this every time it comes up, half of Seekers can run Promise of Power, and I'm upset about it. Why is it a practice skill? Did you rehearse your deal with the devil in the mirror? What are we even saying here? Anyway, Promise of Power is also a really good card. With 3s defensively, you basically don't fail Mythos test, and Eye of Truth is just Promise of Power with no downside, aside from spending 5 experience to put into your deck. But hey, after you use it, it's sort of like a recursive ward of protection, so it's kind of worth the experience if you can afford to put it in a deck. As a raw cluever, Mandy is stupidly powerful. We have a house rule that Segment of Onyx can't evade elite enemies. It's still insanely strong, whether you're teleporting or getting testless clues or evading enemies that aren't elite. Or you could play rules as written and evade like fucking Yogg-Sothoth with this. You can. I don't know why it doesn't say non-elite, but you can. This Mandy deck is just stupidly strong. When you build Mandy as a fighter, it makes her worse. get a real fighter. Don't try to brute force your Seekers into fighters. I just wanted to prove that you could. And I'm still kind of shocked that it went as well as it did. We only died like twice. And one of those is in Depths of Yacht. You're not supposed to live in that one. Mandy's just really, really strong. One thing I did realize throughout the course of this campaign, though, well, two things. The first is that Shocking Discovery is a lot more brutal than I remembered it being. I think I've just gotten better at the game, and that's why I realized that it's so brutal. You scry your deck like 3 or 4 times per cycle, which means that you're probably triggering Shocking Discovery and drawing an event card instead of like 20% of your scry attempts. Like 1 in 5 times that you try to do the Mandy thing with Mr. Rook or Practice Makes Perfect, instead you draw an event card. And don't get me wrong, Mandy's still obviously worth running, but Shocking Discovery is brutal. The other thing I realized, because I was playing that fighter version of the deck that has all this experience but elsewhere, is how much it hurts you to be spending experience that's not just on the best thing you can do. Like, yeah, I needed these cards, and before I got them, I needed Mr. Rook. But I could have gotten deduction level 2s. And in this deck, sure, I got in all of this stuff, but if I hadn't needed to buy Mr. Rooks, I could have bought Eye of Truth. In Seeker, every experience you spend that isn't just on the strongest thing available to you, as a Seeker generally, is experience that hurts you. And looking at this deck, you can get more powerful cards in here. Another Eye of Truth, replace Milan with Shanae and find a spot for hiking boots. There's always more experience spent in Seeker that's meaningful, so having to spend 8 experience on Rook, or 11 if you're getting Charisma on top of that, does hurt Mandy in a sort of invisible way. Now, I'm going out of my way to talk about the downsides of Mandy, because she's busted. Easily one of the best characters in the game. Very few other characters could have done this. It's kind of just Mandy and Harvey that have the draw and the consistency to consistently hit these cards fast enough to function as a fighter. Harvey would have actually done it better, but I had just played Harvey a lot, and I figured this is the only chance I had to play Mandy that people won't hate. Mandy is generally a character that is not as fun to watch. I hope my editing style fixes that a little bit, but Mandy takes a lot of time to play, so I really wanted to put her in Seeker's Only Forgotten Age so that her campaign would still be a challenge and that she wouldn't just single-handedly ruin everything. And I'd say that largely that plan worked. There were a couple of scenarios that were stomps, but there were also a couple of scenarios that felt borderline unwinnable at points. So yeah, I really liked Mandy, even played as this janky style of fighter. And looking at a more normal cluever Mandy, like, it's obviously better. If your team really does need help fighting, then don't get the Archive of Conduits, don't get the Eye of Truth, upgrade your Occult Lexicon, cut the Magnifying Glass for something else, and put in an Ancient Stone. That's more flex damage than your team will ever need. And you're still almost as good at fighting. Or at clueving, rather. Mandy's just an incredibly, incredibly strong character. Everyone knows this. This video didn't need to exist, but I always make Investigator reviews at the end of a campaign once I finish playing them. And for the sake of completion, here's the starter Mandy deck. Originally, I was planning on keeping the Scroll of Secrets to duplicate Ancient Stones and just running one of them. Just like use the Ancient Stone, shuffle it back in by discarding it with the Scroll of Secrets, and then find it again. I very quickly found out that that was not fast enough. I needed just a second Ancient Stones for more fuel. And you can see it's like basically the same deck. I'm running I Got It plans because I just needed more fuel to fight with in the early scenarios, but it's pretty much what you expect out of a level 0 Mandy deck, just with a couple of little things that seem wrong. She's just a monster. Mandy's just incredibly good. And before I end the video, because we're done talking about Mandy, I don't know why literally every other Seeker gets Promise of Power. It doesn't feel okay to me. Anyways, I've been Rather Coherent. Hope you enjoyed this brief rant about how Mandy is in fact one of the greatest Seekers out there, and I'll see you in the next one.